What's going on, everybody? Richard Sapp here. I am the DIY Realtor. Today we are talking caulk, and I'm going to give you a few tips and techniques to lay the absolute perfect bead of caulk, because there's nothing worse than making a gigantic mess out of it. However, it's very easy to do if you're not careful, so stick around. So the first thing that you're going to want to have on hand is a wet rag, because no matter how bad you mess it up, the great thing about caulk is you can always just wipe it away and start over again, and it really doesn't matter. You want either a knife or some scissors to cut the tip of the caulk off, and you'll always want to prep your surface by wiping it down. If it's baseboards and it's dusty, you certainly don't want to be caulking over the dust. If it's something like this on a kitchen counter, you want to make sure that there's no water in there, because if you try to lay it on dust and water, it's just not going to sit very well. First thing that we're going to want to do after we've prepped the surface and have our wet rag is cut the tip off. Now, the smaller your hole that the caulk comes out of, the better. You have more control over it. If you start to mess up, then it's not as big of a deal. It's not as much to wipe off, and not as much gets wasted. If you start cutting a really big hole and cut this nozzle up here, then you have a ½ inch of caulk being expelled every time you're holding the gun, and that's just way too much. When you run your finger on it, it's just going to glob everywhere. So step number one is cut the tip off at a pretty small hole. And you can either use scissors or your utility knife. Obviously, use gloves if you're going to be doing it this way, but support it here, and then you can just slice it as such. Now, because we cut this at an angle here, we're going to want to make sure that the longer end of it is actually facing up and the shorter end is facing down, so that when the caulk comes out, it's being pushed and forced down into the crack in the crevice. If we held it like this and had this end facing up, then obviously the caulk is going to come up at us, and we don't want that. So we want the longer end of this angle facing up. Some people will put a marker or a Sharpie on it. Fine, whatever you want to do. Not necessary. Just remember that the long end goes up. The gun, once you put it in the caulk gun, you're going to want to squeeze it until you feel it engage with the tube. Once you have done that, then it is highly recommended that you give it a test squeeze first, just to see how much is coming out and at what pace. Also, to make sure that there is no clogs or air pockets in here, especially if this isn't a brand new tube. Then you're going to want to use the something sharp or pointy to puncture it and make sure that there is no clogs or air pockets when you first go to lay it, because sometimes you can be squeezing, nothing's coming, and then all of a sudden it bursts out and just makes a complete mess. So always test it first. This one's looking good. The consistency is good, and you can see that it's a pretty thin piece of caulk that's coming out, which is what we want. Now, in this case, I would normally use a clear caulk, but we're going to use the white one here for example purposes, so that you can see. And I'm actually going to take gloves off, because I want to use my fingers to spread it. And they make all sorts of tools, and there's tricks of using popsicle sticks or cardboard or whatever. Frankly, all you're going to need is your finger to wipe it, make sure that it lays down perfectly. It also helps if you're right-handed to go from left to right, so moving towards your dominant hand. If you're left-handed, it works easier to hold the gun in your left hand and go right to left. Again, remember, if we mess this up, we've got our rag here. We'll just wipe it off and start again. There's very few instances where you're not going to get a second chance at caulking, no matter what. We've got it engaged. This is how you release it on the back end here to get the caulk to stop. We're going to put the shorter end of the nozzle into the corner. We're going to squeeze gently for it to start coming out, and then I'm going to judge how quickly the consistency is coming out based on how much pressure I'm putting on the gun, and then I'm going to move it slowly as it comes out. But I'm not going to be pressing. I'm going to leave a little bit of space so that the caulk has somewhere to go, because if I just do it like this and start pressing the gun, then it's all going to squeeze out because it has nowhere to go. So we want to leave a little bit of an opening for the caulk to go underneath the gun and in the corners. Let's do it. Now, you're going to take your finger and lightly brush it. There is no, you don't need to press down really hard. You're just going to lightly stick your finger over it and wipe. And you see we didn't put much down, and that still is coating the crack and crevice perfectly. We didn't need a special tool to lay the caulk after we put it down. Just a simple finger swipe along, and there we have it. Now, let's say you completely screw this up and you don't like it. This is too much. Maybe you botched it and you do something, crazy. Just get your wet rag and wipe it off. So let's do it again, and I'll do it while I'm holding the phone close to it, but we've got the long end facing up. We've got the short end that's going to go into the cracks and crevice here. Squeeze until it starts coming out, and then just slowly move it along. Take our finger, and that's it. I didn't go all the way in because for demonstrative purposes here, but that is how you can cleanly lay a nice bead of caulk.